Welcome. You're listening to The Weather Lounge, a podcast by WeatherWorks. Get ready to explore the world of weather and connect with engaging guests, bringing you fun and thought-provoking stories of just how weather shapes our lives, sometimes in ways you've never imagined. So, join us as we unravel the mysteries of the atmosphere. Today's episode starts right now.
Hi there, and thanks for stopping by the Weather Lounge. I'm your host, meteorologist Brad Miller, and joining me again for today's podcast is fellow WeatherWorks meteorologist Jen Iorio. What's going on, Jen?
Not much, Brad. How are you? How's your summer been going?
Not too bad. It's been a little steamy around here lately, that's for sure. But
Yeah, just a little.
it's as much as you think like the summer is slow, but it's kind of flying by already. Hard to believe we're at the end of July already.
Yep, it's crazy that we're at the end of July already.
I know, and it's been so steamy. We got a break from the humidity for a couple of days last week, but we're kind of getting right back into the same kind of pattern.
Mm-hmm.
The humidity is back, although it's not as hot, I guess, as it was last week, or I guess for the third week of July. If you remember, we were talking about that the heat index was like what 100 to 105 up and down the East Coast.
Yeah, I mean, even higher in spots.
Yeah.
Kind of eclipsing 110. It was crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, it goes with the territory, and we're getting into the old what they call the dog days of summer.
Yep. ACs have been working hard.
yeah. We got a brief break, but yeah, they're back on, and that's the thing. The heat you can handle to a point, but it's that humidity, it's the oppressiveness that your body just can't cool itself off. And for the pets too. I mean, Coconut probably hates the hot weather.
Coconut is not overly, it's the humidity as well for her.
Yeah.
She loves to sunbathe first half of the day, but yeah, when it gets really hot like this, I kind of cut her off and tell her,
yeah,
all right, we have to limit that.
Yeah, and you got to be careful with the dogs too when you take them for a walk in the afternoon. I mean, that pavement temperature,
yeah.
As much as we talk about pavement temps in the winter, for snow, stickage, and things like that, it's just the opposite in the summer where, even if it's 80 degrees outside and it feels like a nice day, that pavement could easily be 100.
No, yeah, definitely. I have little kind of booties that I can put Coconut's paws in when we go on walks. She's not fond of them, but it will protect her in the long run. So, because they can get really burnt.
I could see Coconut in like a one of those doggy rain suits.
Oh, she has one of those too. Any kind of outfit / accessory that Coconut could have, my mom has likely bought it for her.
Oh, nice. Coconut, the most spoiled dog in the world.
Yep, pretty much.
Pretty much. She's a good dog. I love seeing Coconut.
Yeah. When she comes into the office, she is very thrilled to be seeing everyone. I think
WeatherWorks unofficial mascot.
Exactly. A little Bichon poodle.
yeah, that's true. But all right. Well, you know what? This is a good segue as we continue to talk about summer, Jen, and we're gonna reach out to our long range forecasting team, of course, Kyle Leahy and Kevin Winters, and even Stephen Coppertino. They've all been keeping an eye on things as we get further in the summer. And of course, the tropics are likely going to heat back up here shortly. So joining us here in the podcast, Kyle Leahy, and he's got our impromptu midsummer update. So Kyle, thanks for dropping by the Weather Lounge.
Yeah, of course. It's always nice talking to you guys. Can't believe summer's pretty much 2/3 of the way done by now.
It's crazy.
I know. As you get into late July and then, you get that first week of August going, and then social media, of course, going to post that first. Oh, look at the leaves are changing in the UP of Michigan. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, there's that. Football starting to get going again.
That's right. Yeah, exhibition football gets going, and
it's Labor Day before you know it.
Yeah, and then it'll be snowing before we know
it. Oh,
jeez.
So. The big story this summer, Kyle, was the transition basically from an El Nino and kind of a rapid transition into La Nina as we head through this summer. So where are we at in regard to the transition, if you will?
So we've definitely made some progress towards it. However, I mean, things have stagnated a little bit. As of right now, it looks like we're kind of hovering in like neutral territory. So pretty much like within half a degree of zero, kind of teetering on the negative side. But again, we've definitely moved away from El Nino. That's long gone at this point. You're starting to see some colder anomalies, or just colder than normal water in the Eastern Pacific. So it's getting there. Um, it's not nearly there yet. We're not in a La Nina yet. It's probably going to be a few more months until we get there. If we do get there, it's not a lock, but it's making progress.
So let's talk about how we are transitioning into this La Nina. And granted, a couple of months back when we had our first summer update, or at least our outlook for this 2024 summer, and you were talking about how we were going to go into a steamy, hot pattern for much of the eastern U.S., and there we are dealing with it at the moment. So what do we see going forward now as we continue to transition to La Nina?
Yeah, so La Ninas are generally on the hotter and drier side, which is what we've been seeing. So that's really, nothing too surprising. Um, It looks like we are going to see, and this is a bit anomalous, I guess, but it looks like we are going to see a bit of a respite from the drought that is currently ongoing. It's not like a severe drought or anything like that, but I think there are, mild to moderate drought conditions over like parts of the Mid Atlantic and like Maryland. Um, but we should see that start to break. That's really because this is also somewhat typical of not the La Nina, but there's something also called the PDO, which is the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, which is negative right now, which is pretty much when you have like really warm water over Japan, and it's usually cold water off the West Coast, but now it's pretty much sort of not as hot because of climate change. It's really just the difference between the two. So that helps lead to like low pressure hitting the West Coast. So that kind of trough on the West Coast is going to help break us out of the drought that we're seeing, mainly sort of like over the next week or so. Generally, I mean, seems like we've already gotten some pretty beneficial rain over the last 10 days, but it'll just kind of help us as we move forward.
So Kyle, like you said last time we had you on the show here, with the heat and humidity that we were expecting for this summer, and obviously that has been coming to fruition. But how much longer do you think that we're going to see this, persistent heat and humidity for? Because I'm dying over here, and I could use a little bit of a more prolonged break than just a day or two here and a day or two there.
Yeah. So I mean, unfortunately, it seemed like, at least even when we had made the forecast, that August was generally going to be one of the hotter months, which seems relatively hard to believe considering it's been so hot recently. But it does look like it at least gets a little bit less humid towards like mid late August, because instead of having sort of like these continuous kind of waves of moisture, which it looks like we're seeing for the start of August, still a ways out there, but that's the signal right now. It looks like we're going to start to see some more high pressure start to roll over the ridge in the west, which has been there for quite a while. So that's usually a drier pattern and less active as well. It's tougher to get more organized systems. However, the issue is that once you get into late August, really after like the 20th, and we'll get into this later, but that's when you start to get the tropics ramping up. So it's also easier to just get like surges of moisture from that as well. So I don't think that, based on what we're seeing right now, that like it's going to be a particularly, I guess, I'm not sure you could say chilly for August, but I guess closer to normal. And also even like with climate change and all that going on, like it's really difficult to get like a solidly below normal month. It's like really tough anywhere. So, I mean, depending on what averages you use to compare it to, but it's pretty difficult.
Right, and then even if you're 5 or even 6 degrees below normal in August, nobody knows because you're still pretty warm. The average high, I mean, you're going to notice 5 to 10 degrees below normal in January more so than you will in August.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure even kind of like late last week, it was still Friday, like it's warm out, it's really nice, but I'm pretty sure even that day was like 10 degrees below normal, or at least maybe 5, but no one would really think that because it's a beautiful day out, so like no one really cares.
And and then with that pattern now, and we think about, of course, last summer when we had the wildfires, and I guess that's the reason why. I mean, there are some fires in Canada this year, not as many as, of course, they had in 2023. But I guess this pattern is keeping things a little clearer because it is more hot and humid. That Bermuda high is a little more in control versus last year. I mean, last year it seemed like we got a lot of cold fronts even into the midsummer.
Yeah. So I was doing some looking before the podcast, and there is a good amount of smoke like across parts of southern Canada, but like we normally see, everything just kind of gets whisked away west to east. So the wildfires in the Pacific Northwest are kind of going as they normally do this time of year. It's nothing really that uncommon to see them, but at the same time, we're seeing the smoke just kind of get pushed to the east. Last year was like the perfect storm of wildfires. I'm not even sure if we're going to see that again
And
anytime
plus, we had
soon.
a pretty persistent northwest flow for a while,
Yeah,
well into
yeah,
June.
yeah, which is already weird. Like that's already pretty difficult to do for that long at that time of year. Get a low pressure system sitting in that spot for like 5 days. That's tough to do sometimes in the winter, let alone in the summer. In the summer, it's quite rare. So I wouldn't anticipate seeing anything like that. Are there going to be a few days where the air quality is a little bit lower than it should be? Yeah, that happens. I mean, even on days without wildfires, we had a few days that were just so smoggy.
Just because it's the heat and humidity building.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you'll have days like that. Maybe a few days with even like some residual smoke, but nothing to that extent. Again,
Yeah, the more the air quality concerns are more of your, heat and humidity, ozone. Yeah, exactly. Typical summertime kind of concerns with that.
And yeah, and the weather itself kind of drove that pattern last year. I mean, it's just, and of course the gloom and doom, social media. Oh, this is the new norm for the Northeast. This is We knew why it was happening. Yes, it was horrible. It was bad. Couldn't go outside, but it was just because of the pattern that we were under. This year's complete opposite. We got a lot of Bermuda high influence. Heat humidity getting pumped in, and it's keeping southwest winds a big difference from the northwest when we've got fires in Canada.
exactly. So I mean, yeah, the wildfires are still going, but doesn't really look like with the pattern that we have that they're going to lead to any impacts here. It's just which is usually what happens. So don't really see a change from that. Also, last year, there was also really dry conditions over Southeast Canada, and then we also had wildfires spark up right over here, which is also on the rarer side. It happens, but they're usually more of a Western U.S. thing. So a lot of things had to happen for that to occur. None of which are happening now.
Yeah, I don't know if I would rather have the heat and humidity or the cooler wildfire. I don't know. That was nasty last year.
I'd rather heat and humidity.
Yeah, I
The
agree.
cooler wildfire. I mean, literally last year, I felt like we oscillated between it was either raining or it was a nice day, but we had wildfire smoke. And yeah, the wildfire smoke, I don't know, it just killed me with
No,
the
you couldn't even go outside. It was horrible.
allergies, asthma. Yeah, it was not good. So I'd rather the heat and humidity because at least I can be outside in the pool or at the beach or.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, generally for summers, kind of building on what I was sort of saying before, is like really the only way for you to get a below normal summer is for it to be like really wet. Like you literally need clouds. That is like the only thing that will do anything. Like if you get like, like a trough moving through and there's full sun, it's still going to be
You're
hot.
still going to get into the 80s
It's
in
going to
most
be
places.
hot. But like last summer was actually below normal, shockingly, over the entire season for like a pretty big chunk of the eastern United States, which is only because it was so wet. It was
Yeah,
like
it was a
insanely
very
wet
wet
last year.
summer.
So this year is not looking like that. So, which is kind of what we were anticipating anyway. It always looked like a pretty dry summer.
All right, well, let's move on to the other elephant in the room here, and you kind of mentioned it earlier, Kyle. That's we're getting deeper in the hurricane season now. We kind of usually turn a corner as we head into August, obviously, but so far it's again, as of when we recorded this, in the middle or the third week of July, there were still only 3 named storms so far, and of course we had Beryl. That was a big boy. We had Steve come on and talk to us on the podcast right before the 4th of July about that, and we're still stuck on the C name. After Chris, we haven't had any other activity really. I mean, what are we looking at now? Is it time to maybe say, well, we're not going to have as much of an active season, or is that just too early?
It's too early. I mean, generally, right now, there are a couple things that are holding the hurricanes back. Um, a lot of the tropical convection that we're seeing, or just thunderstorm activity, is currently over like Indonesia, like the maritime continent, all the way over there. Um, and instead of seeing that sort of convection or just rising motion over us, we're actually seeing a lot of sinking motion, which as one could imagine, is not helpful when you're dealing with tropical cyclones. You want to also see that, rising air. That does look to change as we head into August. Generally speaking, it looks like we're going to see everything pretty much flip. We're going to see more sinking air toward, Indian Ocean, maritime continent, kind of like, Oceania, and we're going to see more rising air in like the Caribbean and parts of the Atlantic. Along with that, there's also more or less a dust storm traveling across the Atlantic with all the Saharan air. So that's also kind of lowering the humidity and really tanking the chances. Yeah. So even though it's already late July, it's kind of easy to forget that the peak of the hurricane season is really like September. It's a long ways away. So it might be like, oh, summer's been going on for a while. Where are the hurricanes? You know, it's still very early in the year. Beryl was like an absolutely ridiculous anomaly. We'll probably never see anything like that happen ever again. Like I can say that with like a good amount of certainty. I mean, the world is different now than it was, but yeah, getting a category 5 that far south that early in the year is insane. So I wouldn't use that as like you know, a barometer for where this year should go. It still looks active. Like I don't see anything that like puts the active to very active year in jeopardy or anything like that. It's just a quiet period.
I guess there's been talk with the Saharan air layer that's been going on, plus the sinking air you've been talking about. So, I mean, I can't remember what year it was. It was an active year, but we had a very inactive first couple of months. And it's like you're right. We went into like early August, and it was just like flipped a switch, and all of a sudden there were like 5 named storms in the Atlantic Basin. Whether it was down towards Africa and the Caribbean, the Gulf, and even in the North Atlantic. So I guess that's kind of what you're looking ahead to.
Pretty much. I mean, it can really be as quick as that. Like, you don't really have to wait all that long um, to get a lot of development. I mean, especially considering just how warm the water is in the Atlantic still. I mean, Beryl didn't really do all that much of an impact considering that it was, a little bit of a while ago.
Yeah, it's probably recovered already, most of the Caribbean, I would
Yeah,
imagine.
and it was also moving along pretty quick too, so it wasn't really upwelling a lot of cold water. Um, so yeah, I don't really see anything that's deleterious to the rest of the outlook as of right now. We'll see how things go over the next couple of weeks. I mean, we like to see the tropical forcing and that convection I was talking about kind of become more favorable, but there's pretty good agreement on that. I don't really see a reason why that wouldn't occur. And again, climatology just gets more favorable the closer to September you get. So you kind of have a few things working, and that Saharan air isn't going to last forever. It'll push through. You know, it's also relatively common to have those kinds of events at this time of year. So it's just a down period. It's nothing we haven't seen before, really.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're still not in the peak yet. Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about track then. Obviously, everyone's always like, oh, well, here's a pinpointed area, or here's the best chance of getting Maine to Corpus Christi, Texas, is always going to be the target areas. Obviously, some years, it's a little more targeted towards one area versus another. But the way I look at it is, look, you have a chance if you live on the coast anywhere. But I mean, is there really anywhere this year that's a little more maybe a little more, I guess, higher end chance of seeing a landfall?
I would certainly say like Florida and the Gulf Coast, pretty much. I mean, looks like we're going to continue to see that, elongated Bermuda high, and that's just going to, pretty much ease storms towards Florida, basically. In terms of the East Coast, given how many storms there could be this year, I guess technically you have like higher chances than normal to see a landfall. However, I wouldn't exactly say that like the proportion is higher. It's really just like you're just shooting more darts at the board, basically. And I mean, like it doesn't look like a favorable pattern for landfalls on the East Coast because you have that big Bermuda high, and that's going to pretty much help storms recurve out to sea. And it still looks like there's some hints of troughiness over like Southeast Canada, which makes sense because we've sort of had that big like Plains Rockies ridge. So that Plains Rockies ridge kind of leads to that broad trough over not really the East Coast, kind of flattens out too much by then, but definitely over, like Southeast Canada, which is sort of the opposite of what you want to see if you want to get like an East Coast landfall. For an East Coast landfall, you want to have really a big high over like Maine, Nova Scotia, because that just traps everything from escaping. But it doesn't look like we're going to see that here. I mean, maybe you can't predict something like that, 2 months out. It's not possible, but it's definitely not favored.
Like Sandy is the ultimate the scenario, right, where you have the high to the north and it kind of deflected everything right into the mid Atlantic. I mean, I was in South Carolina at the time, and we couldn't believe it was going to miss east and just travel up the Atlantic like that, and then make a hard left. I mean, they're down there. We were all in preparation for Sandy because I think at first it looked like it was going to make a landfall somewhere in the southeast coast, but then run after run, you know, the trough is a little sharper to the west and pulled it further north, and then we're like, oh my God, it's already at our latitude, so we're done. It's not going to have any impact on us. And then, of course, the euro came out, and everyone said, oh my God, no way could this happen.
Yeah, that was also like, multiple things happening. I mean, you had
That's a
that big high.
perfect combination.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you had that big high over Southeast Canada, as you were saying, which was already like off the charts strong and pretty stationary. It was like a perfect block. But then you also had that like perfectly timed sharp trough that helped capture it. Like the odds of one of those two things happening during a landfall are already pretty low. But like both of them happening
and then
at like the
what was it,
perfect
a
time.
full moon or a new moon or something where the tides were already higher?
Yep. Yeah. So like the odds are just
And like you said, you can have a general pattern that probably favors a lot of recurves and storms that aren't going to get the East Coast. Like you said, it's maybe that is the general pattern 90% of the hurricane season for us here, at least in the East Coast. But you do get that one anomalous week where, yeah, there is a trough a little further west, and you do have high pressure that's over, eastern Canada, and you do have a incoming storm, and then that's every storm can recurve except for one, and that'll make it a memorable year. I mean, nobody knows what happened the rest of that year. We got all the way to Sandy, obviously, and I'm sure there were a couple of more names, but nobody knows what else happened that year. All they talk about was Sandy, and that's what makes it a memorable year.
Yeah, I mean, generally, all you need is, all it takes is one storm. And just to kind of reiterate what you were saying, like, there's no way that these models at that lead time can give any sort of like specific impact guidance. It's just not possible. So yeah, even though for like, I don't know, you could say 80% of the hurricane season, you could average a trough over the portions of Canada that we're talking about, but there could just be a random ridge there one week at the same time a hurricane is trying to recurve. Like it's not possible to be like, oh, like, looks trophy, we're just not going to see anything. If anything, again, the odds are slightly higher because you have kind of more rolls of the dice, so to speak. You're probably going to have more recurves than normal, so you have a higher chance of seeing like direct impacts than normal. But it's not to say that the pattern's favorable, if that makes any sense.
And the hurricane seasons are goofy because I mean, look at the year Andrew hit South Florida. There were only a total of 7 named storms that year, but all anyone remembers about is Andrew. And then you got, of course, the super active year 2005 with and that was highlighted by Katrina. But there were so many others that destroyed Florida.
It's also kind of annoying because that year is one of like our analog years for this year, and it's similar to like the winter where you could have like a really good analog year in the set of analogs, and then people are like, oh no, we're gonna get Katrina. And it's like, no, like nah, that's not really how that works. It's just sort of the conditions are just more favorable for landfalls to occur. Will they occur in that way? Probably not, because that's just as bad as it gets. But I mean, over the last several years or so, it's been pretty easy for these hurricanes to intensify pretty explosively, like on a whim, pretty much. Like Beryl wasn't supposed to be a Category 5. That wasn't even supposed to be a major hurricane for most of the time it was being forecast. It just blew up. Ian's another good example. That just blew up. And that's also we're good at forecasting the track. The track is, I wouldn't say easy to forecast by any means, but
no, but it's definitely better than it was 20 years ago.
yeah, but like forecasting intensity is still borderline impossible. Like it's sometimes you could be off by multiple categories, usually to the downside. Usually you kind of bust a low on the intensity, but I mean, hopefully with AI and stuff like that, maybe with machine learning, that might be able to help us out with that.
Because Beryl just I mean, it was going into areas where we knew there was more shear, and it was going to encounter it, and we figured it would start to weaken and kind of get a little more lopsided, where it wasn't like able to keep its strength, but it did. Somehow it just kept trucking on through the Western Caribbean, and that's usually a tough spot for a lot of tropical systems to go through. They sometimes call that like the graveyard of the Caribbean. It's tough to get all the way through there.
Yeah, it's because there's so many mountainous areas. I missed all of them basically. And yeah, I mean, just how warm the water's been this year so far definitely plays a part. It's just increased energy for the storms to use, and that hasn't really changed, at least so far this year.
It'll be interesting, that's for sure. And it's almost like you're waiting on it. You're like, all right, every outlet out there, including WeatherWorks, everyone's forecast is expected to be for a very active season. And again, we're off to a little bit of a slow start, but you know, by again all means, I don't doubt anyone's. I don't doubt our forecast. That's for sure. You guys are great at what you do with long range stuff, but it's almost like you're waiting for something to happen, and then once it goes, it's just going to go off crazy.
I mean, like it's fair to. I mean, trust me. Like even sometimes, like I feel that way too.
It's like that emoji when somebody's eating popcorn, you're just waiting.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I'll put it this way. So, like generally around this time of year, there's only around like 10 storms per day, pretty much on, you know, like today, basically, like end of July. But that number, gets to close to, 60 to 70 in September. Like it's just not even close. Even August 1st, it gets up to like 25. It only really gets up to like the peak is really from like August 10th until, I mean, around this time of year, there's more storms at the end of October than there are now.
There's always a second peak there.
Yeah. So it's again some patience needs to be used here. I think you're just gonna have to give it a few more weeks.
Yeah, if you look at that graph that everyone sees like every year, I mean, it's almost like a very slow, gradual
And
climb,
then it
even
just
through
shoots up.
July, and then it just shoots right up. Right.
Yep, right into mid-August. Which, for all, I mean, based on everything we're seeing, I do not see why that wouldn't happen this year of all years.
Well, I guess we'll just continue to monitor and keep everyone updated. Our next name is Debbie on the list there. We've got Ernesto, which I kind of remember before. We've had a few Ernestos, Francine, and we talked about this on the last podcast about the tropics. But no Jennifer this year.
What a shame.
Yeah, some common names. We got Tony in there and Patty and Oscar. So Wonder if you guys think Beryl will get retired.
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know. It's tough because it was such an early.
It didn't really do anything. That's the thing.
You're right. It wasn't like it wasn't like the major catastrophic storm. But all right. Well, I think that's about it. Jen, you got anything else?
I don't think so. I think we covered the rest of the summer here pretty well, and let's see what happens, and then we'll be talking about winter next.
No.
I know.
I think we're going to have one more. We'll have to have a mid-tropical update as we get, because basically we're just starting the tropical season. So maybe we'll kind of revisit with Kyle or even Steve again as we get maybe into early September, mid-September, because by then we could have 5 or 6 Atlantic storms at once and pulling our hair out of our head and just kind of trying to figure out where everything goes, because I just want to see a good Fujiwara this year. How about that? That's always a good buzzword on social media.
It's pretty rare to see. So
it is, yeah. You would have to have the storms pretty close together. All right, well, Kyle, I appreciate you coming on today and talking to us again.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle.
Yeah, totally, of course.
And Jen, we'll chat again here shortly. We got a couple of great podcasts coming up. Looks like we've going to get back into one with Tony Leonard, our friend from the Philadelphia Eagles.
Very
exciting, we're going to get
yeah.
him on and hopefully in the next couple of weeks and talk to us about the football season upcoming. He's been on the podcast again, and of course we'll have a bunch of others as we go on into the fall. And that just about wraps it up for this week's episode. And again, while we're focused on the summer, we're still only about a month and a half away from the official start of fall. Before we know it, winter will be knocking at the door, like Jen said. And next month, we'll be releasing our very early predictions for the upcoming winter season. So be sure to subscribe to the Weather Lounge and get notified when that airs. And again, thanks for tuning in. And you can find us at weatherworksinc.com and, of course, on all social media platforms. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.
That's a wrap on this week's episode of the Weather Lounge podcast. Thanks for listening. Be sure to follow us on all your favorite podcasting platforms so you don't miss out on future episodes. Have questions or comments? Just email us at weatherlounge@weatherworksinc.com. We'd love to hear your feedback. You can also learn more about our parent company, WeatherWorks, by visiting weatherworksinc.com and checking them out on social media as well. Thanks again for joining us, and until next time, stay curious and stay weather-wise.